Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. The organ hummed low and heavy, filling St. Augustine's Church in Harlem with a sound that felt more like a warning than a celebration. Zora Jackson stood at the back of the aisle, her hands trembling under the weight of a bouquet she didn't pick. White roses, too perfect, too expensive, too wrong. The dress clung to her like a second skin, all silk and sequins, shimmering under the stained glass light that painted the pews in reds and blues. It wasn't hers. None of this was. She was wearing her sister Lena's wedding, her sister's perfume, her sister's life. And at the end of the aisle, Miles Carter waited, tall, proud, blind as a stone, with a face so calm it made her stomach twist. He didn't know the woman walking toward him wasn't the one he'd fallen for over late-night phone calls. Not yet. Zora's mother, Ruth, stood behind her, one hand clamped around her wrist like a handcuff. Her nails dug in just enough to sting, a silent threat wrapped in a mother's grip. "Move your ass, girl," Ruth hissed under her breath, her voice sharp as a switchblade. "You ain't got no choice now. Lena's gone, and this family's counting on you. Don't you dare fuck this up." Zora didn't look back. She couldn't. Her eyes stayed locked on Miles, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. The church smelled of old wood, candle wax, and the Dior perfume Ruth had sprayed on her, an hour ago, in the cramped dressing room where this whole nightmare started. She took a step forward, then another, the heels clicking loud against the hardwood floor. Too loud. Every pair of eyes in the pews, Harlem folks in their Sunday best, plus a few slick-haired reporters from downtown, watched her like hawks. She felt their stares on her skin, dark and glistening with sweat despite the November chill. Her throat tightened, but she kept walking, the bouquet shaking in her grip. Miles didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there in his black tux, hands clasped in front of him. His hair fell across his forehead in a messy wave, and his eyes, pale, unseeing, were half closed, like he was lost in a dream. Zora wondered what he saw in the darkness. She wondered if he'd see right through her. The minister cleared his throat as she reached the altar, his voice booming over the murmurs. "We're gathered here today to join Miles Carter and Lena Jackson in holy matrimony." Zora's heart stopped. Lena. That name hit her like a slap. She wasn't Lena, not the bold, laughing woman who'd spent 6 months charming Miles over the phone, promising him a future full of jazz and late-night talks. Zora was the quiet one, the shadow, the sister who'd been handed a script and told to play the part because Lena had bailed at the last damn minute. She glanced sideways, catching Ruth's glare from the front row, eyes like steel, daring her to mess this up. Next to her, Darius, her older brother, slouched in his seat, a flask peeking out of his jacket pocket. He wouldn't meet her gaze. "Do you, Lena Jackson, take Miles Carter to be your lawful husband, in honor, in love, and in duty, till death do you part?" The minister's words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Zora swallowed hard, her mouth dry as dust. She couldn't look up, couldn't face the cameras flashing from the back. Ruth nodded once, sharp and quick, like a general giving an order. Zora's voice cracked as she forced it out. I do." The room exhaled. A ripple of applause broke out, polite but loud enough to drown out the thudding in her chest. Miles tilted his head toward her, just an inch, and for a second, she thought he'd say something, call her out, unravel the lie right there in front of God and everybody. But he didn't. He just reached out, his hand steady, and found hers. His fingers were warm, rough at the tips from years of playing piano, and when they brushed her skin, She jolted like she'd touched a live wire. "You're shaking," he said, low enough that only she could hear. His voice was smooth, deep, with a hint of gravel, like he'd smoked too much in some past life. "Why are you shaking so bad?" Zora froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to run out of this damn church and never look back. "I'm just nervous," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Miles didn't push it. He just squeezed her hand, light but firm, and turned back to the minister. The ring slid onto her finger, cold, heavy, final. She was his wife now, not Zora Jackson, but Lena Jackson, at least in the eyes of the world. The reception was a blur. Champagne she didn't drink, congratulations she didn't deserve, Ruth's smug grin as she worked the room like a politician. Zora stuck close to Miles, letting his arm guide her through the crowd. He didn't say much, just nodded at the right times, his face unreadable. She wondered how a man who couldn't see could carry himself with so much damn presence. By the time they climbed into the Rolls-Royce waiting outside, her head was pounding, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The car pulled away from Harlem, gliding south toward Connecticut, where Miles's estate loomed like some Gothic fairy tale. Zora sat stiff against the leather seat, the silk dress bunching up around her thighs. Miles was next to her, head back, eyes closed, hands resting in his lap. She thought he might be asleep until he spoke. "You don't smell like you did on the phone," he said, casual, as if he were talking about the weather. "That perfume, it's sharper now." Her stomach dropped. "I forgot to put on the usual," she lied, fumbling with the hem of her dress. She'd spent months perfecting Lena's scent, some floral bullshit Ruth swore Miles loved. Tonight, she'd messed up, grabbed the wrong bottle in the chaos of getting ready. Miles nodded, slow and deliberate, like he was filing it away. "Huh? Tired, huh?" he said. Not really a question. She mumbled a yes, staring out the tinted window as Harlem's lights faded into the distance. The estate was massive, 3 stories of gray stone wrapped in ivy, windows glowing dimly against the night. A butler opened the car door, bowing slightly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter," he said, and Zora flinched at the name. Miles stepped out first, offering his hand without hesitation. She took it, letting him lead her inside, his steps sure despite the darkness he lived in. The foyer smelled like polished wood and money, the kind of quiet that pressed down on you. No music, no chatter, just the soft click of their shoes on marble. He guided her upstairs, past walls lined with black and white photos, landscapes, cityscapes, nothing personal. The bedroom was wide and cold, a king-sized bed with crisp white sheets and 2 pillows set miles apart. Miles let go of her hand, crossing to the window to crack it open. A breeze slipped in, sharp and cool, rustling the curtains. "You can take the left side," he said, unbuttoning his tux jacket with practiced ease. "I don't move much when I sleep." Zora stood there, rooted to the spot, watching him shed the jacket and loosen his tie. He moved like he'd done this 1,000 times, every motion smooth, deliberate. She should have said something, good night maybe, or thanks. But her tongue felt glued to the roof of her mouth. Instead, she kicked off the heels, Lena's heels, too tight and pinching her toes, and climbed into bed, still in the dress. The mattress dipped as Miles settled on his side, facing away. She lay on the edge, staring at the ceiling, her breath shallow, silence stretched out, thick and heavy, until his voice cut through it. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie," he said, quiet, not directed at her, but loud enough to pierce the room. Zora's heart stuttered. She didn't know if he meant her, Ruth, or the whole damn world, but it hit her like a brick anyway. She turned her head, studying the back of his neck, the way his shoulders rose and fell with each breath. He didn't say anything else, didn't move, but she knew he wasn't asleep. He was listening, to her, to the night, to whatever truth he'd already started to unravel. She didn't sleep either. The hours crawled by, marked by the wind rattling the window and the faint creak of the house settling. Her mind raced, replaying his words, his touch, the way he'd said she was shaking. She'd thought stepping into Lena's life would be simple. Play the part, cash the check, save the family. But Miles wasn't some clueless mark. He was sharp, too sharp, and she was already slipping. The ring on her finger felt like a shackle now, glinting in the moonlight that spilled across the bed. By the time the sky started to lighten, Zora was still awake, her body stiff from lying so still. Miles shifted, rolling onto his back, one arm flung over his head. His chest rose slow and steady, but his face wasn't peaceful. It was focused, like he was dreaming with his ears instead of his eyes. She watched him, her chest tight, and wondered how long she could keep this up. How long before he heard the truth in her silence. Downstairs, the house was waking up. Soft footsteps, the clink of dishes, the hum of a coffee pot. Zora slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded to the bathroom. The mirror showed a stranger, makeup smudged, hair a mess, eyes wide and scared. She splashed water on her face, cold enough to sting, and gripped the sink. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, but it sounded like a lie even to her own ears. When she came back, Miles was sitting up, his head tilted toward the door. "You're up early," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Couldn't rest?" She hesitated, then nodded, forgetting he couldn't see it. "Yeah. Long night." He smiled, just a flicker, but it softened his face. "Guess we're both adjusting, huh?" He swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for a robe draped over a chair. "Come on, let's get some coffee. I want to hear how you take yours." Zora followed him downstairs, her bare feet cold against the floor, her mind spinning. Coffee. Such a small thing, but it felt like a test. Lena took hers black, no sugar. Zora remembered that from the script Ruth had drilled into her. But as she watched Miles move through the kitchen, pouring 2 mugs with a steady hand, she felt something shift, something dangerous, something real. "Hey," he said, sliding a mug toward her. "You ever feel like you're not where you're supposed to be?" She nearly dropped the cup. "What?" "Just a thought," he said, sipping his own. "Sometimes I hear it in people, the way they breathe, the way they pause, like they're carrying something they can't put down." Zora stared at him, her pulse racing. He couldn't know. Not yet. But as she lifted the mug to her lips, the bitter black coffee burning her tongue, she couldn't shake the feeling that he already did. You ever feel like you're carrying a secret too heavy to hold? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, it's gonna get wild. The Connecticut estate felt like a museum. Too big, too quiet, too perfect. Zora woke up to sunlight spilling through tall windows, bouncing off hardwood floors that gleamed like they'd never seen a footprint. She'd barely slept, her body still wired from the night before. From Miles's voice, cutting through the dark like a blade. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie." It echoed in her head as she pulled on a robe, Lena's robe, soft gray cashmere that smelled faintly of lavender, and tiptoed downstairs. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of coffee and something baking, probably the work of the invisible staff who moved through this place like ghosts. Miles was already in the kitchen, sitting at a long wooden table that could have seated 20 but held just him. He'd swapped the tux for a black sweater and jeans, his hair still messy from sleep. A mug steamed in front of him, and a plate of toast sat untouched. He didn't look up when she walked in, but his head tilted slightly, tracking her steps. "Morning," he said, voice low and steady. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," Zora lied, sliding into a chair across from him. The table stretched between them like a canyon. "You?" He shrugged, one shoulder lifting lazily. "Good enough. You want coffee? Hazel's around here somewhere. She'll grab it." "I can get it," Zora said, too quick. She stood, needing something to do with her hands, and crossed to the counter where a pot sat brewing. The kitchen was all stainless steel and white tile, the kind of spotless you'd see in a magazine. She poured herself a mug, her back to him, and hesitated. Black, no sugar. That's how Lena took it. That's how she was supposed to take it. But her fingers twitched toward the sugar jar anyway, a small rebellion she caught just in time. She left it black and returned to the table. Miles tapped a finger against his mug, a soft rhythm like he was playing a tune in his head. "So," he said, "what's the plan today, Mrs. Carter?" The name landed like a punch, but his tone was light, almost playful. Zora forced a smile he couldn't see. Settle in, I guess? Figure out where everything is?" He nodded, slow and thoughtful. "Fair enough. This place is a maze if you don't know it. I'll show you around later. Don't want you tripping over my stuff." He paused, then added, "You're quieter than I thought you'd be." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "On the phone," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You were always laughing, talking a mile a minute. Now you're, I don't know, softer, like you're holding back." Zora's grip on the mug went white-knuckled. She'd spent months practicing Lena's laugh, bright, loud, the kind that filled a room. Ruth had made her do it in front of a mirror until her throat hurt, until it sounded right. But here, with Miles staring through her with those unseeing eyes, it felt fake, heavy, like a costume she couldn't wear anymore. "Guess I'm just tired," she said, taking a sip to hide the shake in her voice. The coffee was bitter as hell, and she fought not to grimace. Miles didn't push it. He just nodded again, like he was storing it away with all the other little things he'd noticed. The perfume, the trembling, the way she'd frozen when he'd asked why she was shaking. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint clink of his spoon against the mug. Then he stood, smooth as water, and grabbed a cane leaning against the wall. "Come on," he said. "Let's walk." The estate sprawled out behind the house, a mix of manicured lawn and wild edges where the trees took over. Miles led the way, his cane tapping lightly against the stone path, his step sure despite the uneven ground. Zora followed, her sneakers sinking into the damp grass, the air cool and thick with the smell of pine. He didn't need her help, didn't ask for it, but she stayed close anyway, watching the way he moved, like he'd mapped this place in his head 1,000 times. "Over there's the garden," he said, pointing with the cane. "Roses mostly, some lavender. Used to be my mom's. She liked things pretty even if I couldn't see 'em." He smirked, quick and dry. "Guess I got that from her." Zora glanced at the flower beds, purple blooms swaying in the breeze. "They're nice," she said, then winced at how flat it sounded. Lena would have gushed, spun some story about planting flowers in Paris or some bullshit. Zora didn't have it in her. Miles stopped walking, turning his head toward her. "You don't talk about flowers much anymore," he said. "Remember that call? Think it was July? You went on about orchids for 20 minutes straight, said they were like music you could touch." Her stomach flipped. Orchids. She didn't know a damn thing about orchids. That was Lena, Lena's voice, Lena's words, Lena's charm. Zora had only picked up the phone halfway through the game, when Lena got bored and handed it off like a chore. Yeah, she stammered, scrambling. I guess I'm more into lavender now. They're simpler. He didn't say anything for a second, just stood there, the wind tugging at his sweater. Then he nodded, once, sharp. Simpler, sure. He started walking again, faster this time, like he'd heard something in her voice he didn't like. They ended up in the dining room that night, a space as cold and empty as the rest of the house. A long oak table stretched out under a chandelier that threw shadows across the walls. 2 plates sat in front of them, grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, nothing fancy. But Zora barely touched hers. Miles ate slow, methodical, every bite measured. She watched his hands, the way his fingers brushed the edge of the plate, feeling for the fork. He didn't need her to cut his food or guide him. He didn't need her at all, and that scared her more than anything. Your voice, he said suddenly, setting his fork down. It's different. She flinched, a potato halfway to her mouth. Different how? Softer, he said, leaning forward just enough to make her feel pinned. Slower. Got a little rasp at the end, like you've been singing too long. It wasn't like that before. Zora's throat went dry. Maybe I'm just tired, she said, echoing yesterday's excuse. It's been a long couple days. He inhaled, slow and deep, like he was tasting the air. And the perfume. If you're wearing one, it's not the same either. I forgot the usual, she said, too fast, her voice cracking. She cursed herself silently. She was slipping, and he was catching every damn stumble. Miles nodded, but the air between them thickened, heavy with something unspoken. He didn't call her out, didn't raise his voice, just sat there, his blind eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder. Dinner dragged on in silence, the clink of silverware loud against the quiet. When she stood to clear her plate, his voice stopped her cold. Do you remember our first phone call? She froze, one hand on the chair. What? Our first call, he said, leaning back. I told you about Paris, how I played piano in this little bar off the Seine. You told me about your cello, how you wanted to open a music shop by a lake someday. Ring any bells? Zora's mind went blank. Paris, cello, a lake. She didn't know any of that. Lena did. Lena had spun those stories, not her. She'd only stepped in later, parroting lines Ruth fed her, mimicking a laugh she didn't feel. Oh, right, she said, forcing a smile he couldn't see. I said, I wanted a bookstore by the lake, didn't I? Miles tilted his head, just a fraction. No, he said, voice flat. You didn't say that. Her breath caught, sharp and loud in the stillness. She waited for him to push, to demand answers, but he didn't. He just picked up his fork again, brushing it against his napkin like he was ending a song. It's fine, he said, almost too soft to hear. I've got a good memory. Too good sometimes. Makes people squirm. Zora didn't answer. She stared into her water glass, wishing it was whiskey, something strong enough to burn away the panic clawing up her spine. He wasn't blind. Not the way she'd thought. He saw her, heard her, felt her in ways she couldn't hide from. She'd expected a clueless rich guy she could fool. Not this. This man who picked apart her lies like threads in a sweater. That night she lay in bed again, the space between their pillows feeling wider than ever. Miles slept on his side, turned away, his breathing even, but not relaxed. She watched the rise and fall of his back, her own chest tight with something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or guilt, or something hotter, deeper, that scared her even more. The wind howled outside, slipping through the cracked window, and she let it carry her thoughts away, back to Harlem, back to Ruth's voice in her ear. "You owe me this, girl. Don't you forget it." She didn't know how long she lay there before her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it quick, silencing it before it woke him. A text from Tasha, her best friend back home. "How's it going, Mrs. Millionaire? You holding up?" Zora's fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to spill it all, the wedding, the lies, the way Miles looked at her without looking. But she didn't. She just typed back, "I'm fine, just tired." Tasha's reply came fast. "Bullshit. Call me tomorrow. I know you're drowning out there." Zora almost laughed, a shaky little sound that died in her throat. She set the phone down and rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. Drowning. Yeah, that was about right. She was in over her head, and Miles Carter was the tide pulling her under, one quiet, steady question at a time. Morning came too soon. She dragged herself downstairs, finding Miles in the kitchen again, this time with a radio humming low in the background. Some old jazz tune, all saxophone and heartbreak. He didn't say much, just handed her a mug and went back to his toast. But as she sat there, sipping the black coffee she hated, he broke the silence. "You ever play that cello anymore?" Her hand jerked, splashing coffee on the table. "What?" "You talked about it once," he said, casual as anything. "Said it was your first love. You still play?" Zora's mouth opened, then closed. She did play, used to anyway, before Ruth sold her cello to pay Darius's bail 2 years back. Lena wouldn't have known that, wouldn't have cared. "Not much," she said finally, her voice small. Life got in the way. Miles nodded, like he understood more than she'd said. "Shame," he murmured. "I'd like to hear it sometime." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything, just sat there, the jazz filling the gaps, wondering how long she could keep pretending before the mask cracked wide open. The days blurred into a quiet rhythm at the Connecticut estate, each one a tightrope. Zora walked between playing Lena and slipping into something dangerously close to herself. She woke early, before the sun crept over the trees, and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Miles was always there already, sitting with his coffee, the radio humming some old tune, Billie Holiday one morning, Coltrane the next. He didn't talk much at first, just listened, his head tilted like he was mapping her every move. She started making breakfast, not the fancy stuff the staff left out, but the kind she grew up on in Harlem. Cornbread from scratch, crispy at the edges with a side of bacon sizzling in the pan. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and heavy, cutting through the sterile chill of the house. Miles noticed. "That's not Hazel's cooking," he said one morning, sniffing the air as she slid a plate in front of him. "What's this?" "Cornbread," Zora said, keeping her voice steady. "My mom's recipe. Figured you might like it." He took a bite, slow and deliberate, then nodded. "It's good, real good. Lena never mentioned you could cook like this." Her stomach twisted, but she forced a laugh, light, fake, close enough to Lena's to pass. "Guess I picked it up somewhere," she said, turning back to the stove so he wouldn't hear the hitch in her breath. She wasn't supposed to be good at this. Lena didn't cook. Lena ordered takeout or flirted her way into someone else doing it. Zora was the one who'd stood over the stove with Ruth, stirring pots while Darius drank himself stupid in the next room. But Miles didn't push it, just ate in silence, and she let herself breathe again. She started doing more, small things, things she couldn't stop herself from doing. She'd dust the shelves in the living room, rearrange the books she found stacked haphazardly, their spines cracked from use. One afternoon, she wandered into Miles's study, a room nobody touched, sealed up like a tomb since he'd lost his sight. The air was thick with dust, the smell of old paper and leather heavy. A grand piano sat in the corner, black and silent, its keys yellowed at the edges. She ran a finger over them, pressing one down. The note rang out, sharp and lonely, and she yanked her hand back like she'd been caught stealing. "You're in here," Miles said from the doorway, his voice startling her. She spun around, heart pounding. He stood there, cane in one hand, his sweater sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "I heard the key." I was just looking," Zora stammered, stepping away from the piano. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said, cutting her off. He walked in, slow but sure, and brushed a hand along the edge of the desk. "Nobody's been in here since I stopped playing. Smells like it, too." She watched him move, tracing the room with his fingers, past the bookshelf, the chair, the stack of sheet music gathering dust. "Why'd you stop?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could catch it. He paused, his hand resting on the piano. "Lost the point," he said, voice low. "After the accident, it felt like pretending. Couldn't see the keys, couldn't feel the music the same. So I let it go." Zora didn't know what to say. She wanted to ask about the accident. Ruth had mentioned it once, a car crash that took his sight and half his family, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she grabbed a rag from the hall and started wiping down the desk, the shelves, anything to keep her hands busy. Miles didn't stop her. He just stood there, head tilted, listening to the soft scrape of cloth against wood. "You don't have to do that," he said after a while. "I want to," she replied, too honest. "Makes it feel lived in." He didn't answer right away, but she caught the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. Small, real, the first one she'd seen. "All right," he said. "Knock yourself out." She kept at it over the next few days, cleaning the study, cooking breakfast, falling into a routine that wasn't Lena's. Miles didn't say much about it, but he started lingering longer in the kitchen, asking her about the food, the spices, the way she'd learned to make gravy thick enough to stick to your ribs. She told him bits and pieces, stories about Harlem, about Ruth's kitchen, about the time Darius burned a batch of biscuits so bad they had to air out the apartment for a week. She didn't mean to, but it spilled out, and Miles listened, soaking it up like he was starved for it. One evening, after dinner, chicken and greens she'd thrown together, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're different." She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. "What?" "Different," he repeated, voice soft but firm. "Not just your voice. The way you move, the way you fill this place. It's warmer, softer. I don't know how to explain it." Zora's pulse raced. She wanted to laugh it off, play it cool like Lena would, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. "Maybe I'm just settling in," she said, weak as hell. "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. He stood, grabbing his cane, and headed for the door. "Night," he tossed over his shoulder, leaving her sitting there with a plate of cold food and a knot in her chest. She couldn't sleep that night. The bed felt too big, the room too quiet, Miles's words looping in her head. Warmer, softer. He wasn't supposed to notice that. He was supposed to hear Lena, bold, brash, untouchable Lena, not her. She rolled onto her side, staring at the sliver of moonlight cutting through the curtains, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She snatched it up, squinting at the screen. "Tasha. Girl, you alive out there? Call me. Now." Zora slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Miles, and crept downstairs to the kitchen. She dialed, keeping her voice low as Tasha picked up on the first ring. "About damn time," Tasha said, her voice loud and warm even through the phone. "Thought you'd gone full rich bitch and forgot me." "Shut up," Zora whispered, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "I'm fine. Just figuring shit out." "Uh-huh," Tasha said, skeptical. You sound like you're drowning. What's going on with Mr. Blind Millionaire? He catch you yet? Zora's stomach dropped. Not yet, she said, leaning against the counter. But he's close. He keeps saying stuff about my voice, my cooking. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Tasha snorted. Told you that plan was dumb as hell. Ruth's crazy and Lena's a snake. You should have told them both to kick rocks. Too late now, Zora muttered. I'm in it. Signed the papers and everything. Yeah, well, watch your back, Tasha said, her tone shifting. Heard from my cousin. Darius has been running his mouth at the bar. Said he's got some side deal going. Something about screwing over your new husband. You know he's a mess when he's drunk. Zora's blood went cold. What kind of deal? Dunno, Tasha said. But it's bad, Z. He's mixed up with some dude from New York. Big money, shady as hell. You better talk to him before he fucks this up worse than it already is. Zora hung up, her hands shaking. Darius. Of course he'd pull something stupid. He'd been a train wreck since their dad walked out, drowning in booze and bad choices. She sank into a chair, head in her hands, the weight of it all pressing down. She wasn't just lying to Miles anymore. She was caught in something bigger, something she didn't even understand yet. The next day, she took Miles out to the garden. He'd asked her to lead him, leaving his cane behind, his hand resting light on her arm. The air was crisp, the lavender swaying in the breeze, and she described it to him. Purple blooms, white daisies, the way the light hit the leaves. He didn't interrupt, just walked beside her, his grip steady but not tight. You don't talk about orchids anymore, he said out of nowhere, stopping by the rose bushes. Zora's heart skipped. What? Orchids, he said again, turning his head toward her. You used to go on about 'em, how they were delicate but tough, like they could survive anything. What happened? She scrambled, her mind blank. I thought maybe the other flowers deserved a turn, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lavender's nice too, right? Miles didn't answer right away. Then he smiled, not big, not bright, but real, like he'd caught something she didn't mean to give away. Yeah, he said. Lavender's nice. They kept walking, the silence stretching out. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of him, of her, of the cracks she couldn't hide. That night she cooked again, collard greens this time, slow simmered with a ham hock, and he ate every bite, his face softer than she'd ever seen it. When she went to bed, he stayed up, and she heard the faint sound of the piano through the floorboards, one note, then another, like he was testing it, waking it up. She lay there, listening, her chest tight with something she didn't want to name. She wasn't just playing Lena anymore. She was changing things, him, this house, herself. And that scared her more than getting caught ever could, because if she wasn't careful, she might start wanting to stay. The quiet couldn't last. Zora felt it coming, like the air before a storm, thick, electric, ready to break. She'd been at Miles's estate for 2 weeks, slipping deeper into a life that wasn't hers, when the knock came. It was late, the kind of late where the house creaked and the wind howled, like it had something to say. She was in the kitchen, scrubbing a skillet she'd used to fry chicken when the sound jolted her, 3 hard raps on the front door. Miles was upstairs, probably asleep, and the staff had gone home hours ago. She dried her hands on a towel, her pulse ticking up, and crept to the foyer. Through the peephole, she saw them. Ruth and Lena, standing under the porch light like a pair of wolves. Ruth's face was all hard lines, her coat pulled tight against the cold. Lena leaned against the railing, arms crossed, her lips curled in that smug little smirk Zora knew too well. She hesitated, her hand on the knob, but Ruth banged again, louder this time. "Open the damn door, Zora," she barked, voice cutting through the wood. "We ain't got all night." Zora's stomach sank. She unlocked the door, pulling it open just enough to face them. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "It's late." Ruth didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past Zora, heels clicking sharp on the marble floor, and Lena followed, tossing her hair like she owned the place. "We need to talk," Ruth said, turning to fix Zora with a stare that could have cracked glass. "Now." Zora shut the door, her hands trembling. "About what?" "About you getting too damn comfortable," Lena snapped, strolling into the living room. She ran a finger along the mantel, inspecting it for dust, then flicked it away like it offended her. "The maid's been talking, says you're cooking breakfast for him, taking him on walks, reading to him like some kind of fairy tale. What the hell, Zora? You forget who you're supposed to be?" Zora's mouth went dry. She'd known this was coming. Ruth and Lena didn't let go of anything they thought was theirs. "I'm doing what you told me," she said, crossing her arms to hide the shake, keeping him happy. "That's the plan, right?" Ruth stepped closer, her shadow looming under the chandelier's dim glow. "The plan," she said, voice low and venomous, "was for you to play Lena, not turn this into your little love story. You think he's yours now? He's Lena's. Always was, always will be. You're just the stand-in." Zora's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. "He's not a damn prize," she said, louder than she meant to. "He's a person. And he's good. Better than you give him credit for." Lena laughed, sharp and cruel, the sound bouncing off the walls. "Good? What? You think he's some blind saint you get to save? Get real, Zora. He's a paycheck, and you're screwing it up by getting soft." Before Zora could snap back, footsteps echoed from the stairs. Miles appeared, cane in hand, his sweater wrinkled from sleep. His hair was a mess, but his face was calm, too calm, like he'd heard every word. "What's going on?" he asked, voice steady as he stepped into the room. Ruth straightened, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miles, honey," she said, all sugar. "Didn't mean to wake you. Just a little family visit, checking on our girl." Miles didn't move, his head tilting toward Zora. "Didn't sound like checking in," he said. "Sounded like yelling." Lena stepped forward, her voice dropping into that smooth, flirty tone she'd used on the phone all those months. "Miles, it's me. Lena," she said, reaching out to touch his arm. "Been a while, huh? Remember that night we talked about Paris? You played that song for me, the one you wrote by the river?" Zora's stomach churned. She watched Miles's face, waiting for it. The moment he'd light up, pull Lena close, unravel everything she'd built. But he didn't. He stepped back, just enough to break her touch, and turned his head toward Zora. "Funny," he said, voice flat. "You don't sound like that anymore." Lena faltered, her smile slipping. "What?" "Your voice," he said, tapping the cane once against the floor. "It's sharper now. Harsher. Not like it was." Ruth jumped in, her tone tight. "She's just tired, Miles. Long drive out here. You know how it is." Miles didn't answer. He stood there, silent, the air thick with tension. Then he turned to Zora, his blind eyes somehow pinning her in place. "Who are you?" he asked, quiet but firm. "Really?" Zora's breath caught. The room spun, Ruth's glare burning into her, Lena's smirk daring her to break. She could lie, stick to the script, laugh it off, keep the game going. But her throat closed up, and the words wouldn't come. She started, then stopped, her hands clenching into fists. I'm Zora, she said finally, her voice breaking. Zora Jackson, not Lena. The silence that followed was deafening. Ruth's face went slack, then twisted with fury. Lena let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head. Well, damn, she said. There it is. Miles didn't flinch. He just stood there, his grip tightening on the cane. Zora, he repeated like he was tasting the name. How long you been playing this? Since the start, Zora said, tears stinging her eyes. They made me. Ruth, Lena, all of them. Said it was to save the family. I didn't want to, Miles, I swear. Save it, Ruth cut in, stepping between them. She's lying to cover her ass. Lena's the one you love, Miles. Zora's just a nobody who got greedy. That's not true, Zora shouted, her voice cracking the quiet. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. But I stayed, Miles. I stayed because I love you. Not the money, not the house. You. Lena snorted, rolling her eyes. Oh, please. You love him? You don't even know him. I'm the one who talked to him, who built this. No, you didn't, Miles said, cutting her off. His voice was low, cold, like a blade sliding out of its sheath. I've known for a while. Hired a guy in New York to dig around. Found out Lena bailed months ago. I waited, though. Wanted to see if you'd tell me yourself. Zora's knees went weak. You knew? Yeah, he said, turning to face her fully. Knew your voice wasn't hers. Knew the way you set my tea on the left, not the right. Knew you weren't the one who talked about Paris. But I let it ride. Wanted to see what you'd do. Ruth stepped forward, her face red. This is bullshit, Miles. She's a liar. You can't trust her. I don't, he said, sharp enough to make her flinch. Not completely, but I don't trust you either. Or you, he added, nodding toward Lena. You think I'm some dumb mark you can play? I'm blind, not stupid. Zora's tears spilled over, hot and fast. I'm sorry, she choked out. I should have told you. I wanted to, but I was scared. Scared you'd hate me. Scared I'd lose you. Miles didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his breathing slow and deliberate. Then he turned to Ruth and Lena. Get out, he said, voice like stone. Both of you, now. Ruth sputtered, her hands flying up. You can't. I can, he snapped. This is my house, my life. Get the hell out before I call somebody to drag you out. Lena grabbed Ruth's arm, pulling her toward the door. Come on, Ma, she muttered. He's not worth it anymore. She shot Zora a look, pure venom, before they stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Zora stood there shaking, the room spinning around her. Miles didn't move, didn't speak, just let the silence settle like dust. When he finally turned to her, his face was hard, unreadable. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, quieter now. All this time, why'd you keep lying? I didn't know how, she said, wiping her face with her sleeve. I thought if I told you, you'd kick me out. And I didn't want to go. Not because of the money, because of you. The way you listen, the way you make this place feel like home. I've never had that. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint cedar of his sweater. You think I'd keep you here after this? He asked, voice low. You think I can just forget you've been pretending to be someone else? No, she whispered. I don't expect you to, but I had to say it. I had to tell you I love you, even if it's too late. Miles exhaled, sharp and rough, like he'd been holding it in too long. Love, he said, almost to himself. That's a hell of a word to throw around. It's the truth, she said, meeting his blind gaze. I don't care if you believe me. It's the only thing I've got left that's mine." He didn't answer. Just stood there, the cane tapping once, twice against the floor. Then he turned and walked back upstairs, leaving her alone in the dark, the echo of her own words ringing in her ears. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, and let the tears come, big, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She'd lost him. She'd known it was coming, but it still hurt like hell. Hours later, when the house was quiet again, she heard the piano, soft, halting notes drifting down from the study. She didn't go up. She just listened, her heart breaking with every key, wondering if it was his way of saying goodbye. The next morning, the house felt like a graveyard, silent, heavy, full of ghosts. Zora hadn't slept, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her body slumped on the couch where she'd stayed all night. The piano had stopped some time before dawn, leaving only the wind rattling the windows. She didn't know what to do. Pack her bags, wait for Miles to kick her out, or just sit there until the world swallowed her up. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, Tasha's name lighting up the screen, but she didn't answer. She couldn't face anyone. Not yet. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Zora's head snapped up as Miles came down, his cane tapping a slow rhythm. He was dressed, jeans, a dark sweater, a coat slung over his arm, like he was going somewhere. His face was still hard, but there was something softer in it now, something she couldn't read. He stopped a few feet away, head tilted toward her. "You're still here," he said, voice rough from sleep or something else. "Yeah," she croaked, sitting up straighter. "Didn't know where else to go." He nodded once, like that made sense. "I'm heading out," he said. "Hospital in the city. Got an appointment. You coming?" Zora blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Appointment," he repeated, pulling the coat on. "Been on the books for a while. Some doc from Switzerland thinks he can fix my eyes. Odds aren't great, but—" He shrugged, casual, like it was no big deal. "Figured you might want to be there." Her mouth opened, then closed. You want me there? After last night?" Miles didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his cane resting against his leg, his breathing slow and even. "I don't know what I want yet," he said finally, "but you're still my wife. On paper, anyway. Thought you should know what's happening." She didn't argue. She grabbed her jacket, her hands shaky, and followed him out to the car. The ride to New York was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Miles sat straight, hands in his lap, his face turned toward the window, like he could see the blur of trees and highways. Zora stole glances at him, her chest tight with a mix of hope and dread. He hadn't forgiven her. He'd made that clear. But he hadn't thrown her out either. She didn't know what that meant. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, the waiting room all white walls and stiff chairs. Miles didn't talk much, just sat there while the nurse rattled off instructions. Surgery tomorrow, bandages off in a week if it worked. Zora listened, nodding when she had to, her mind spinning. If he saw again, he'd see her, not Lena's makeup, not Lena's clothes, just her, plain and raw and real. The thought made her want to run. She stayed anyway. For the next week, she was there every day, bringing him coffee he didn't ask for, reading him the paper when his head hurt too much to focus, sitting by his bed while he slept off the meds. He didn't push her away, but he didn't pull her close either. He just let her be there, like he was testing her, waiting for something she didn't know how to give. The morning they took the bandages off, the sky was clear, sunlight pouring through the hospital window like it was holding its breath. Zora sat beside him, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her stomach in knots. The doctor hovered, peeling back the gauze slow and careful, murmuring about light sensitivity and recovery time. Miles kept his eyes closed. Even after the last layer was gone, his face still as stone. Then he blinked, once, twice, and opened them. Light hit his eyes, pale green and sharp, like they'd been carved from glass. He didn't squint, didn't flinch, just let it flood in, fierce and immediate. His gaze swept the room, white walls, beeping machines, the doctor scribbling notes, then landed on her. Zora froze, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't blink, her heart slamming against her ribs. He looked at her, not with surprise, not with anger, just looked, like he'd known she'd be there. "You're not Lena," he said, voice quiet, measured, like he'd been practicing it. She flinched, the words landing like a punch. "No," she whispered, her eyes filling up. "I'm not." He sat up, slow and stiff, his gaze never leaving her. "I've known," he said, "for a long time. Your voice, it's got that rasp, like you're holding something back. The way you set my tea on the left, not the right. The way you say sorry, like you're waiting for someone to hit you. Lena didn't do that." Zora's tears spilled over, hot and messy. She covered her face, her whole body shaking, not from shame, but from the weight of being seen, really seen, for the first time. "Why didn't you say anything?" She choked out, her voice breaking. "Why'd you let me keep lying?" Miles leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "Because I was waiting," he said. "Waiting to see if you'd love me for me. Not the money, not the name, not some role your family shoved you into." She looked up, her vision blurry, meeting his eyes, new, bright, unflinching. "I do," she said, raw and honest. "I love you, Miles. Not because of what you've got, but because of who you are, the way you listen, the way you play that damn piano, even when you think no one's hearing. I love you." He didn't move for a second, just watched her, his jaw tight. Then he stood, crossing the small space between them, and crouched in front of her. His hand came up, hesitant, brushing her cheek, wiping away the tears with a touch so light it broke her all over again. "Zora," he said, her name soft on his lips, like it was something sacred. "That's the first time I've said it out loud." She let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half relief. "Sounds good when you say it." He smiled, small, real, the kind that lit up his whole face. "Yeah," he said, "it does." They didn't say much after that. He pulled her into his arms, light but firm, and she let him, her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close, something she could hold on to. The doctor cleared his throat, muttering about discharge papers, but they ignored him, locked in that quiet little world they'd made. Later, back at the estate, the air felt different. Lighter, like the walls had exhaled. Miles sat on the couch, his eyes still adjusting, blinking at the shapes and shadows he hadn't seen in years. Zora sat beside him, close but not touching, her hands twisting in her lap. "What now?" she asked, voice small. He turned to her, his gaze soft but direct. "I'm done with it," he said. "The money, the family bullshit, all of it. I've been thinking about selling this place, starting over somewhere else. Just me, and you, if you want." Her breath caught. "You mean that?" "Yeah," he said, reaching for her hand. "I mean it. I don't need all this. I need you. Zora, not Lena, not anybody else. You in?" She nodded, tears welling up again, but this time they weren't sad. "I'm in," she whispered, squeezing his hand back. That night, they didn't sleep apart. She followed him upstairs, her heart pounding, and when he pulled her close, it wasn't tentative anymore. His hands slid under her shirt, tracing her skin, warm, rough, alive, and she let him, her own fingers digging into his shoulders. They moved together, slow at first, then fierce, a tangle of breath and heat and need. He kissed her like he was seeing her with his hands, his lips, his whole body, and she gave it back. Every touch a promise she didn't have to say out loud. It wasn't just sex. It was them, raw and real, stripping away the lies until there was nothing left but the truth. When it was over, they lay there, tangled in the sheets, his arm heavy across her waist. She traced the lines of his face, his eyes half closed but still watching her, and felt something settle, something solid, something hers. "I love you," she said again, soft into the dark. "I know," he murmured, pulling her closer. "I see it now. The Connecticut estate sold fast. Too fast, Zora thought, for a place that had felt so permanent. Miles didn't blink when the papers were signed, didn't linger over the empty rooms or the piano he left behind. "It's just stuff," he'd said, tossing a duffel bag into the back of his old pickup truck. "Never needed it anyway." She believed him. He'd spent years in the dark, building a world out of sound and touch. Walls and money didn't mean much to him anymore. They drove west. No real plan, just a map and a hunch, until the mountains of Oregon rose up around them, all pine and mist and quiet. They found the spot by accident, a small clearing near a lake, the water so still it mirrored the sky. The cabin was run down, wood weathered gray, but Miles saw it with those new eyes of his and nodded. "This'll do," he said, and that was that. They fixed it up slow, Zora hammering nails while he sanded boards, his hands steady even when the light got tricky. She caught him staring sometimes, not at the lake or the trees, but at her, like he was memorizing every line of her face. "What?" she'd ask, brushing sawdust off her jeans. "Nothing," he'd say, smiling that small, real smile. "Just looking." A year later, the sign went up. The sound of light. Hand-carved, simple, hanging over the door of what used to be a shed. It wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a center, a place for blind kids to come and learn what Miles had learned in the dark. Zora taught cello, her fingers finding the strings again after too long, the music spilling out like it had been waiting for her. Miles taught piano, his hands dancing over the keys with a grace she hadn't seen back in Connecticut. They didn't call him a millionaire here, just Miles, the guy who could hear a melody in the wind. The kids loved it. They'd stumble in, nervous and quiet, but leave with their heads up, laughing as Zora guided them around the lake, telling them to listen for the rustle of leaves, feel the damp earth under their sneakers, smell the pine sharp in the air. "You don't need eyes to know where you are," she'd say, echoing Miles without meaning to. He'd grin when he heard her, leaning against the porch rail with a cup of coffee, his eyes soft in the morning light. They didn't talk about Connecticut much, or Ruth, or Lena. The past was a shadow, fading a little more each day, but it wasn't gone, not completely. Zora saw it in the way Miles tensed sometimes, when a car pulled up too fast, or a voice on the phone sounded too slick. She felt it in herself, too, the old fear that she didn't deserve this, that it'd all slip away. But then he'd reach for her hand, or she'd catch him playing one of her cello pieces on the piano, and it'd settle again. They were building something real, piece by piece. One afternoon, a year in, they sat on the porch after the last kid left. The sun was dipping low, painting the lake gold, and the air smelled like wood smoke and wet grass. Miles stretched out beside her, his boots kicked off, his eyes half closed. "You ever think about it?" he asked, voice lazy. "Think about what?" Zora said, leaning back in her chair. "Back there," he said. "The lies, the mess." She nodded, slow. "Sometimes, mostly wonder how I got so lucky to end up here." He turned his head, looking at her, really looking the way he did now that he could. "Luck's got nothing to do with it," he said. "You stayed. That's what mattered." She smiled, reaching for his hand. "You stayed too." "Yeah," he said, lacing his fingers through hers. "Guess we're both stubborn as hell." That night, they played together, her cello low and warm, his piano sharp and bright, the notes weaving through the cabin like a conversation. The kids were gone, the lake was quiet, and it was just them, filling the space with something that didn't need words. When they finished, he pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead, and she felt it. Home, solid and sure, in the circle of his arms. Half a country away, in a sprawling villa on Florida's Gulf Coast, Lena Jackson lived a different life. The house was all glass and marble, the kind of place that screamed money. Her husband's money, now that he'd climbed the ranks to junior senator. She'd married him fast, a whirlwind of charm and red lipstick, locking him down before the car accident took his sight. Now she brewed his tea every morning, picked his ties with the help of an assistant, described the sunsets he'd never see. Pink streaks over the water, she'd say, her voice smooth as silk. Celeste, he'd call her, his pet name for the light of his life, and she'd smile, tight and perfect, every time. But behind it, her lips would curl, just a flicker, before the silence stretched out. She didn't love him, not the way he thought. She loved the power, the status, the way his name opened doors. 4 months blind, and he still trusted her, still leaned on her like she was his anchor. She played the part, just like she'd played Miles, but this time there was no one to hand it off to. One morning, she sat at her vanity, brushing on mascara out of habit, when the assistant's voice crackled through the Bluetooth speaker. "In today's news," the woman chirped, "Miles Carter and his wife, Zora Jackson, received the Humanitarian Award for their work with the blind at the Sound of Light Center in Oregon." Lena's hand froze, the mascara wand trembling mid-air. She set it down, slow, and stared at her reflection. Sharp cheekbones, flawless skin, eyes cold as the marble floor. A laugh slipped out, dry and short, like something breaking inside her. She poured the tea, carried it to her husband in the next room, and leaned in close as she handed it over. "I'm not the light, baby," she whispered, soft enough that he didn't hear, soft enough that the wind carried it away. "I'm just the shadow who stood in the wrong place." He smiled up at her, blind and trusting, and she turned away, her heels clicking as she walked back to the vanity. The award played on a loop in her head. Miles and Zora, Zora and Miles, the sister she'd thrown under the bus, now shining brighter than she ever would. She picked up her phone, scrolled through the headlines, then tossed it aside. It didn't matter. She had this, the villa, the title, the life she'd clawed for. But the silence after her husband's voice faded was long, endless, and it tasted like regret. Back in Oregon, the first snow fell soft and quiet, blanketing the lake in white. Zora stood on the porch, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching Miles lead a group of kids through the yard. They laughed, tripping over each other, their voices bright against the stillness. He glanced back at her, his eyes catching the light, and waved. A small, easy thing that made her heart ache in the best way. She didn't need to be anyone else anymore. Not Lena, not Ruth's pawn, not the girl who'd lost herself in Harlem's shadows. She was Zora Jackson, wife, teacher, survivor, and for the first time, that was enough. Miles came up the steps, snow-dusting his hair, and pulled her into a hug, his breath warm against her neck. "Cold out here," he murmured. "Come inside?" "Yeah," she said, smiling into his shoulder. "Let's go home." They walked in together, the door closing soft behind them, and the world outside faded to a hum. Love didn't punish, didn't forget. It built, slow and steady, until it was all you could hear. And in that cabin, with the snow falling and the music waiting, Zora and Miles heard it loud and clear. Did this story hit you where it hurts, in that good heartbreak kind of way? Drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to hit subscribe. The next journey's waiting, and it might just be yours.